Hello again, YouTubers, Ultimate SpongeBob 11 back here again on the SpongeBob channel. In this video, we are reviewing SpongeBob SquarePants Presents The Tidal Zone. Grandpat travels through alternate dimensions and timelines. Also, observe, if you will, 4 tales, actually 5, of undersea exploits that defy explanation, crossover into new dimensions where minds switch, bodies shrink, and robots rise in the Tidal Zone Special. As a whole, it felt like the Tidal Zone Special flowed extremely well from segment to segment. The entire special can be characterized as wacky, to say the least, along with Grandpat's wandering through the various dimensions and time periods via the Tidal Zone. So the first out of 5 segments is one from the Patrick Star Show, Shrinking Stars, featuring Patrick's family shrinking, of course. How does that happen? Well, thanks to Patrick's idiocy, of course, because Captain Doc, Quasar, and Patron are on set for another installment of The Patrick Show. And when Patron gets a little too glitchy as a result of laughter, Patrick attempts to fix him, and only messes up. Quasar's shrink ray gets stuck on Patrick's head, and he ends up shrinking Squidina, his parents, and himself before Quasar and Patron make a hasty escape in their rocket. The Star family warm up to their new small statures fairly quickly, with Bunny bouncing on the sea bunny and Cecil riding a sea urchin, and so on. Things start going south when their fun causes a water leak that affects Grandpat, who is engrossed in playing his violent video game where he runs over pedestrians. And Grandpat, of course, being frustrated, confronts them in the toilet. He basically treats them as vermin and attacks them with his onion breath. The stars, however, are saved by the Dartfish family, nice to see them again, who shortly after are also scared off by a rampaging Grandpat. In retaliation, they then proceed to give Grandpat a little payback by physically assaulting him, and just generally being a nuisance, of course. The chase is put on hold once Rube shows up and shrinks the stars even further in order to protect them from Grandpat. This is a really random part, considering Rube introduces them to this blown glass city of Schmandor, which is under the sink or something, only for Cecil to ruin the whole thing by singing. The next phase of the episode involves hijacking Grandpat's mobility scooter. I was quite surprised that even with the stars at the helm, there was no destruction at all as they chased him. The episode continues with Grandpat seizing back control over the mobility scooter and then entering Patrick's time door or time portal, only to find himself confronted by mummies at the Sphinx in Egypt. So back in Patrick's room, Patrick finds a jug of Kamp Koral Jumbo Grow and immediately pours it on himself and his family, which shrinks them to the size of subatomic particles, a feature of the chemical being that it makes everything else but Kamp Koral shrink. This begins a chain of weirdness, where Cecil encourages them not to give up and they escape through the particles somehow and end up normal size outside the Star family residence, only to find that the moon has been replaced by a giant eyeball. It turns out that eyeball is actually one of Sandy Cheeks, who's studying them using a microscope. So several questions arise here. Is the world of the Patrick Star Show basically happening on a microscopic level, or did they somehow travel into a new dimension where that is the case? I mean, it doesn't really make much sense here. The episode ends with Sandy making a comment about being watched, only to find an eyeball in the sky watching her as well, freaking her out, and she responds by activating the emergency mode in her freedom. We then flash over to the narrator, Frenchie, giving some words of wisdom. Don't sweat the small stuff, folks. So, plot of Shrinking Stars gets 8 out of 10. The Star family being thrust into a troublesome situation by being shrunken down partially as a result of Patrick's incompetence on its own would be fairly mediocre, but I appreciated the fact that the Star family took it in their stride and ended up having a really wacky adventure. Also, including Sandy and muddying the waters given the context of the Tidal Zone was a welcome sight to see, even though it was kind of strange. Animation gets 8 out of 10. That's my standard for most Patrick Star Show episodes, but I do want to highlight a few scenes that I really liked the look of. We, of course, had the SpongeBob cake mold reference that, on Grandpat. Schmandor looks super cool. Subatomic particle segment was nice to see. Unique characteristics, 9 out of 10. So Grandpat doesn't usually hunt down his family members and is usually portrayed as the most sane out of all of them, but The writers clearly wanted to give him a more aggressive posture under the cover of just thinking that his shrunken family are vermin, and this kind of gets him into a lot of extra trouble because he ends up going through the Tidal zone, right? Shrinking Stars gets 25 out of 30 from me. We are then introduced to the first main series segment, Welcome to Binary Bottom, an alternate version of Bikini Bottom where all characters except Karen are portrayed as robots. SpongeBob is unsurprisingly the focus in the form of SpongeBot, and he is awakened by the classic alarm clock and gets ready for work only to have Gary not want him to leave. Gary then stows away inside SpongeBob, who somehow doesn't notice. Of course, we do get a typical Annoy Squidward segment where SpongeBob tries to alert Squidbot that he needs to go to work, and Squidbot just happens to be setting up an identical robot of himself, and that robot, seeing how irritating SpongeBot can be, decides to self-destruct, for Squidbot can't get a break, can he? Before heading off, SpongeBob visits Patron at his holographic rock. So now we know where the Patron we see in the Patrick Star Show comes from. The Krusty Krab in this alternate reality is the Krabby Battery, which specializes in the production and sale of Krabby batteries. I guess it makes sense. We are also introduced to Robo Crabs, who appears to be built into the restaurant itself, never to see the light of day outside. One thing SpongeBob does on a recurring basis is to fix his friends by whacking them with a wrench. I must admit, that action really made me laugh. As SpongeBob fires up the grill, Robot Gary gets out and in an altercation with Squidward falls into the fryers, to the horror of SpongeBob. The two emerge with Squidbot's head being stuck to Robot Gary's shell, and that becomes a real problem. Robot Gary then smashes through the walls and races away, starting a chase across town. SpongeBob, of course, gives chase, only stopping to pick up Gary's droppings of nuts and bolts before they end up at the grease bucket, which is the alternate chum bucket, of course. I really liked how not only that Karen and Plankton have their anatomy types swapped in the sense that Karen is now a living fish and Plankbot is a robot, but also that Plankton, or Plankbot, is a wind-up robot, pretty cute for the little guy. The chase moves to downtown Binary Bottom, where Gary causes a huge boat pileup and pisses off a whole lot of Binary Bottomites, who then form an angry mob. I also like the addition of the radical drink advertisement on the billboard there. But yeah, Robot Gary races through Sandroid's lair, so that's the robot version of Sandy, awakening her and adding her to the angry mob. Eventually, they reach Loop Lagoon, a place for sun, sand, and relaxation until Robo Gary shows up, of course. This is when the portal door opens and Grandpat arrives, only to speed back in after seeing the incoming angry mob. So yeah, Grandpat's just lost and wandering through realms here. We see a whole lot of characters in robot forms here, from Mrs. Puff and Lady Upturn to Larry and Bubble Bass. The fact that they even threw in a small explosion when Bubble Bass got hit by the volleyball does indeed check the box for explosions. SpongeBob shows off his thinking abilities before activating a rocket jetpack to bring him to the shoreline, where he attempts to build a brick wall to stop Robot Gary from rampaging. Eventually, he realizes how futile that is. Robo Gary, Squidbot, and the mob end up in the lagoon, where Squidbot is finally separated from Robo Gary. This is where things take a huge turn, with Sandroid surfacing from the depths and absorbing the various Binary Bottomites into her body, turning her into a full-fledged robot. Robot Rube only has a few moments to take an amazing picture before Sandroid scoops him and the remaining Bottomites up, incorporating them into her body, and then heads up to the water surface, using Bikini Atoll as a jet ski and proceeding in the direction of a land city, presumably to destroy it and take over. Yeah, the episode took a really dark turn. In terms of plot, this episode gets 9 out of 10 from me. I always love a story with a different setting rather than what we usually get in Bikini Bottom, and this episode provides exactly that, depicting a standard day in the life of the robotic versions of characters that we are used to. I wasn't too stoked about the fact that the episode puts heavy emphasis on Gary, because in essence, Robo Gary was really a complete nuisance. The plot twist, however, with Sandroid wanting to take over the world and Roboplankton actually agreeing was pretty cool to see. Animation gets 10 out of 10 for the simple fact that they had to redesign Bikini Bottom from the ground up. I think they really pulled out all the stops in making Binary Bottom look similar but yet creatively different. Binary Bottom would be a really good setting for a level in a SpongeBob video game, but you know, I guess we'll never see that. Or could we? Unique characteristics gets 10 out of 10. I would say that out of 5 segments of the Tidal Zone, this episode definitely feels the most unique out of them. There were so many cool things SpongeBob himself can do in robot form, plus robot-fying, the characters was really cool to see as well. Welcome to Binary Bottom gets 29 out of 30 from me. We then move over to Kamp Koral for the Switch Glitch. The episode begins with Karen searching the camp surroundings for lightning berries for Plankton's next experiment when she runs into Patrick, who just happens to eat the entire lightning berry tree. And of course he coughs out the trunk, but that's still pretty disgusting. Patrick mistakes Karen for a shoe hat, and when he puts her onto his head, their minds switch. So Karen's CPU chip literally goes into Patrick, and Patrick's tiny brain goes into Karen. As ridiculous as that sounds, it sort of makes sense because Patrick is so brainless anything can replace his brain. At the same time, Patrick's brain can physically, because it's so small, fit into Karen. So yeah, it takes a while for SpongeBob, Sandy, and Plankton to realize what's going on. Patrick causes a whole lot of pain for Plankton by first slicing him in half and then knocking over sulfuric acid onto Plankton. So yeah, that was pretty painful. I really enjoyed the part where Karen, now controlling Patrick's body, tried experiencing feeling by prancing around and even dancing in front of Squidward. Extremely funny. Also, winning Sandy's genius-level board game of ease and leaving SpongeBob and Sandy shocked was nice to see. Kinda like Patrick's smart pants, but not really. Karen reveals what is actually going on and expresses her desire to return to her original body. This starts a whole chase scene where Patrick claims that he loves being a robot shoe and doesn't want to switch back, resulting in Karen leading an epic hunt for Patrick. It is at this point where both parties stop to allow Grandpat, who shows up out of nowhere by the way, to pass on his mobility scooter before the chase continues. Again, I wish Grandpat actually had a bigger role instead of just passing through in cameo fashion, but it is what it is. The chase fails and Karen has to resort to, her last resort. She whips out a ice cream sundae from Patrick's belly button, to tempt Patrick into returning to his own body since Karen's body wouldn't allow him to taste and consume the ice cream. This is successful, but in his ice cream mania, Patrick lets the other Switch hat fall to the ground, causing a huge reaction where suddenly everyone in Kamp Koral becomes like Patrick and just does the lead thing, which is, obviously referencing Shanghai, right? So yeah, very silly ending, but I think the underlying plot was all right. It gets 7 out of 10. Nice references, but yeah, kind of random as well. Animation gets 8 out of 10. I think the animation style used for Kamp Koral is pretty great, and there are additional bonuses here because of all the different ways Patrick and Karen are portrayed in each other's bodies. In particular, Karen being in Patrick's body. One downside, I think, are the voices when they're swapped. Both of them just sound off, but that's not an animation issue. Unique characteristics gets 8 out of 10 for the fact that body swapping is being used now as a plot line in the SpongeBob universe. It's surprising, it is what it is. Executed fairly well, except for the chase, which was just kind of filling time. So the Switch Glitch gets 23 out of 30 from me. Now moving on to the next SpongeBob segment, You're Going to Pay Phone. This episode is another one focusing on Mr. Krabs' most defining characteristic, greed. Similar to how Krabs went nuts chasing a penny in Penny Foolish, he chases after a quarter, which leads him into a strange store where the shopkeep offers him some random items like a furry anvil and a coat made out of sausages, referencing Klopnot from Patrick Star's show. Of course, Mr. Krabs is solely focused in the quarter, which has since somehow gone up into the coin slot of a payphone, which doesn't even have any cords. The shopkeep offers both the payphone and the curse within it to Mr. Krabs for free, and despite the warning, Krabs takes it, again demonstrating the failure of Krabs to exercise any common sense, and he just brings the cordless payphone to the Krusty Krab and installs it. The phone rings, and when Krabs picks it up, it sticks to Krabs' eyes as if it were a magnet and hypnotizes him. The voice from the phone first instructs him to give away Krabby Patties for free, to which SpongeBob is actually more than happy to comply with, seeing Krabs' newfound generosity. However, once Krabs snaps out of the trance, he panics and seizes all the Krabby Patties, even telling a disappointed SpongeBob to bring them back into the kitchen and sew them back together, which is really quite funny. The second call comes in, and Mr. Krabs is now compelled to give away his money. He does just that, making it rain cash in the Krusty Krab. Once he snaps out of his trance, he sees SpongeBob clearing his cash register and rages once more. SpongeBob is understandably very confused as to the pendulum that is Mr. Krabs' behavior. The final call involves Mr. Krabs being instructed to give away the Krusty Krab. Interesting how it wasn't just limited to the Krabby Patty formula, it's the whole restaurant. And Plankton just so happens to be right in front of the Krusty Krab with a new contraption to aid in his latest vile scheme. And Mr. Krabs just heads out and hands Plankton the deed to the restaurant before leaving. Of course, you can't have Plankton getting involved without him getting destroyed or harmed in some way, so we have his laser backfiring on him. But Mr. Krabs realizes the quarters have stopped coming from the payphone. He fiddles with it a little bit, finally discovering that there is a demon operating the payphone on the inside. And somehow they just swap places, with the demon being freed and SpongeBob even lending him a quarter for the bus fare. So Mr. Krabs is thus relegated to being a phone operator in his shrunken size. So going back to the point of the curse, I guess the curse means like being trapped in the phone, not actually being hypnotized by the phone. I really liked how Plankton did end up coming in control of the Krusty Krab and just running it like a normal business. He also instructs Squidward to get rid of the payphone with Krabs in it, to which Squidward is more than happy to comply with. Greed just doesn't pay the way you think it does, folks. I'll give the plot a 7 out of 10. While Krabs was being controlled against his will, I thought SpongeBob should have at least noticed the fact that the payphone was not acting the way it should be and tried to help. On the other hand, I actually like the ending with Plankton being the new owner of the Krusty Krab. A little like Algae's Always Greener, but at the same time, another episode featuring Plankton as the boss could be quite fun. Animation gets 7 out of 10. My favorite scenes include the very detailed interior of the shop, SpongeBob's free Krabby Patty hat, and Plankton yucking it up after winning. So, not too many, it was kind of standard. Unique characteristics gets 7 out of 10. Curses are new in SpongeBob, so just think of the episode The Curse of the Hex, and Mr. Krabs being obsessed with small value while overlooking the bigger picture is not new. References to Cloud Knob were interesting, but going back to the payphone, it is never explained how it works. Anyways, this episode gets 21 out of 30 from me. The final transition features Frenchie once more, with a payphone coming on screen and attaching to him, putting him in a trance like the one Mr. Krabs experienced before Grandpat is seen once again traveling through the wormhole. This begins the really short final episode, A Skin Wrinkle in Time, of course suggesting Grandpat is indeed traveling through time. He first ends up in the SpongeBob theme song and gets his own theme song this time. My favorite part is definitely Grandpa using his dentures to replicate the sound made by SpongeBob's nose flute at the very end. He then travels to Bikini Gulch in the Old West. I never thought the writers would bring this back, but it made a lot of sense with the whole time travel thing. Grandpat interrupts a showdown at high noon, even scooping up one of the cowboys and dragging him into the wormhole. They pass by an alternate Grandpat with a baby face, which looked pretty creepy, and somehow the cowboy finds a seahorse in the middle of the wormhole and gets off at his stop in the wormhole. Random. The episode ends with Grandpat arriving in Patrick's room, heading out to the living room to watch TV, only to realize that he's now in another reality, one where his family members are bugs. Plot gets 7 out of 10. It was a decent conclusion to Grandpat's adventure through time and space via the Tidal zone. And the ending in an alternate dimension definitely leaves things up to imagination. Will Grandpa ever return to his own dimension? No one knows. Animation gets 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed the Grandpa theme song, although the part where Grandpa gets shuffled up is a little bit disturbing, given that he's not exactly like a sponge that could just be cut up and all. But Bikini Gulch, folks, and the crusty cantina in the back, that was a sight to behold. Unique characteristics gets 8 out of 10. I think the writers definitely designed this short episode to provide an epic ending to the special, and the inclusion of completely random segments while traveling through time was still fun to watch. Perhaps a single episode featuring more of Grandpa's adventures, past or present, would be a great follow-up to this one. A Skin Wrinkle in Time gets 24 out of 30 from me. So, taken as a whole, I give this Tidal Zone Crossover Special a 8 out of 10. It's apparent that the writers did their best to feature as many characters as possible, and in many cases with a twist as observed in Binary Bottom. The underlying story arc of Grandpa was kept consistent, although it was unavoidable that most of his travels felt more forced than natural. It was still cool to see him roaming across the Tidal Zone in a search for a way home. If more of his travels were to have its own mini segment, specifically where Frenchie the narrator does the transitions, right? It would be a little bit more interesting, but I'll take what we got. There were a lot of small life lessons sprinkled throughout the episode, which is one thing I feel has been missing in a lot of modern SpongeBob. However, much of it was made apparent by the narrator, not the characters themselves, and of course, there were so many references to the past, some of the most memorable being the Radical ad, Handsome Squidward, Cake Mold, SpongeBob the Nasty Patty, and Bikini Gulch. This experiment combining the 3 SpongeBob shows worked out fairly well, and I certainly look forward to any similar types of events coming in the future. So let me know in the comments box below what you guys thought about this Tidal Zone special or each segment. Did you like it? Make sure to subscribe, like, and I'll see you guys in the next SpongeBob video. Till then, bye!